We all want to be happier, but how do we get there? First, we start by realizing happiness is not a destination. Being happy consists of micro action steps every single day. I'm your host, Brittny King, and I'm here to guide you along the way. All right. Hello, my friends, and welcome back to the Positively Real podcast. I'm your host and coach, Brittny King, and I got a special episode for you. Now, before I introduce today's guest, I just have to say how much I love having this podcast. This is one of my longest commitments that I've been consistent with. I think it's almost like 3.5, 4 years, which is a feat for me because I get shiny object syndrome. I'm surprised I didn't try to do all these other things. I've just been focusing on the podcast and I love it so much. And the reason I love it so much is because I get to connect with people that I wouldn't necessarily ever get to have conversations with. And then I also get to reconnect with people that I knew from my past. And my guest today, Julie Fratantoni, is one of those people. And before we hit record, we were just doing a quick catch up, but Julie and I know each other from high school. And she was her name and what she's doing was brought into my sphere by a friend and a client of mine. And I was so excited to see what she was up to, specifically because it's something that I have a deep interest and passion in. And I always say, if I would go back to school, this is what I would study. I'm like, I don't need to go back to school and study this because I get to learn from people like Julie. So Julie is the head of research and integration partnership at the Center of Brain Health at the University of Texas at Dallas. And she specializes in creating content and tools that help people become proactive about their brain health. So Julie is a skilled science communicator who makes neuroscience approachable and engaging. And she regularly shares brain tips, science insights, Good Morning America, Texas, and on social media. And that's what drew me into Julie. First, when I saw Dr. Julie Fratantoni, I was like, hi, what have you been up to over these past, how many years has it been? It's been so long. So anyway, I reached out to Julie. I was like, I want to talk about brain health, and you are the person that I want to talk to this about. So Julie, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me, Brittany. It is so fun to reconnect with you, and I'm so happy to be here.
So great. So give a little background. Before we hit record, you were telling me how you got into this, but I think it's really important to reshare, not just in our private conversations. So how did you fall into neuroscience and become this amazing science communicator? Because that's really what you're doing. You really make it so you make this very complex thing, the brain, and you really make it so approachable and simple to understand. So tell me how you got into it.
So my love for the brain, I guess you could say it started from birth because both of my parents are psychologists. And so I've always grown up with just a curiosity and an interest in, human behavior. But I would say, my background, my degrees started out in speech language pathology. And so I was really interested clinically in working with the brain when there's injury or disease, specifically traumatic brain injury, and got very interested in a lot of people don't realize that speech pathologists work with brain injured patients and they treat the cognition or cognitive aspects. And all speech and language is how it's a window into the brain. It's how we're able to assess our cognitive thinking abilities. It's very hard to do that without, reading, writing, or speaking. So that was kind of how I got into brain, and then just became so fascinated and decided to pursue a PhD in cognitive neuroscience so that I could better understand the mechanisms of what's going on so that we could, develop better therapy when something goes wrong. But along that way, right when I got into it, I actually was introduced to this concept of high performance and that you can actually train your brain to do better. And I think, we grew up, kind of the timing that we grew up, it was like all of these discoveries around neuroplasticity and the advancements in technology of brain imaging and things like that have really largely taken place over the last, maybe 15, 20 years. So it's kind of been happening as we've been growing up. And so a lot of the things we know now that are commonplace knowledge of just neuroplasticity, your brain can change. That just wasn't the narrative when we were growing up. And so, so anyway, a lot of this was so eye-opening to me and so exciting. And I was just like, I wish I knew this sooner and everyone needs to know this. Oh my gosh. And I nerd out on it, of course, but like, the average person just doesn't know how their brain works or how that there are simple things you can do every day to help it work better. So you can be happier, you can be more efficient, you can, do the things you need to do. And for longevity, right? Our bodies are living longer than ever. We've doubled the human lifespan in the last century, but we have not doubled the brain span to match that. And so it's really important to start to be proactive young, because aging starts in our 20s. So anyway, I kind of took myself on a tangent there, but I really fell in love with this idea of high performance and training and being able to help just your everyday person, that you don't have to have um, anything even wrong. I think even just the average person today does struggle with, focus or attention or mood or, mental energy. There's all these things competing for our attention. We've shifted into, it's a brain economy. Now, before, the majority of jobs used to be very labor intensive, agricultural, factory. Now the majority of jobs are, they're office jobs, they're jobs that require judgment and decision making and creativity, and they're things that we can't just turn off. So now our tool is in our head and it never leaves us, and that comes with a whole new set of needing to adapt. So I just think we've entered a whole new era of how we're using the brain, and wanting to understand how to take care of it and use it better. It couldn't be more important.
I just love everything you just said, because I couldn't agree more. Like, how I got into mindset work is kind of a similar path of just being like learning about growth mindset and learning about neuroplasticity, being like, wait a second, we're not fixed. Like, this isn't just how we're going to be for the rest of our life. Like, we can actually do things proactively to change our brain. That is mind blowing. So I think like similar path of just being like, I want to learn this so I can share this, because it's not common knowledge. You think it is when you're in that world, but when you start talking about it, people are like, no, they don't realize that like it's not fixed.
Yeah, and no one teaches you that in school.
No,
Like the
no.
things you need to know
I'm
about,
keeping a running a list of all the things that we really need to learn in school.
right? It's like your most important organ. You can't do anything without it, and we learned
Literally.
nothing about it. So now's the time. We're making
Now
up for lost
we're
time.
making up for lost time. Well, yes. And I think like this proactive approach, and it is so true. Like, we are like so in our heads with everything. And it is like the brain is a supercomputer. It is like the most intricate, fascinating thing in existence is the human brain. It's why we've evolved as the species, because of our brain. So let's just start with a brief, brain health overview. Can you explain what brain health entails, and why is this crucial for overall well-being, specifically for like mental health and emotional well-being?
Yeah, I think it's really important to define it, because it's sort of a new category of health. I think we've got a category for mental health. We know physical health, we
Mhm.
talk about maybe emotional health, financial health. We don't have this category for just brain. And so brain really encompasses pretty much everything you do. But it's this idea of not just an absence of disease. So it's not just because I'm not sick or I don't have an injury or a disease. It's actually going beyond that to saying like I can thrive within my life context and responsibilities. So everything, mental health is included in that. Things like having a sense of purpose, your daily life interactions, of course, sleep, nutrition, exercise, all factor into your brain health. And then the physical structure of the brain, like your brain blood flow and things like white matter integrity, hemodynamic response, just the actual functional parts and pieces and how they work and how healthy they are. But also, to me, more importantly, is how that affects your ability to perform what you need to do in your everyday life. So just this idea of how is my brain supporting me to thrive and my do things that I need to show up and do every day, and how am I supporting my brain so that it can continue, to function as it is.
So what are some common misconceptions that you've heard about brain health?
I think probably one of the biggest ones is just this idea that it's fixed, or, that it's kind of like, well, this is just my personality, or this is
Mhm.
just, like I'm just this way. And it's like everything is changeable. Now, it's hard to change it. It is hard because, while, I think we have this good news of neuroplasticity, your brain can change at any age. It's like, but that change takes work and it has to be
Mhm.
intentional. It's not going to just accidentally happen, or if you try something new once that it happens, right? It takes a lot of repetition. So there's the saying of repetition rewires. And so by
Mhm.
rewire, we just mean forming different neural connections that become stronger and stronger over time. And then with that, it becomes the default. So it's like a lot with habit formation, or, ruminating thoughts or thinking new thoughts. It's going to take, I like the analogy of like a road, kind of like the more you drive on that road, like you get the ruts and the dirt, right? And it just like gets deeper and deeper. And so it becomes the default to just kind of go right into that rut and just keep going that path each time. And so it's going to take work and intentionality to take a different path in the beginning, but then eventually as you do it more and more, the ruts will get deeper, or the connections will strengthen, and that will become the new habit or the new thought or the new behavior. So yeah, I think just like blowing that notion away that we are able to change, but then also kind of not just leaving it at that of saying, but you have to, here's what you have to do, right? You have to be willing, and kind of set yourself up for that. I think some other pushback that's interesting is people saying like, oh, I don't need that. Like brain health is for like old people, or like, I don't like, I'll worry
Mhm.
about that when I'm older kind of. And it's like I said in the beginning, aging starts in our 20s. Like
Mhm.
basically when you're born, you're just aging your whole life, right? You're getting
It's
older.
like you start aging. Right? I mean, watching my daughter, just her brain develop and how much they learn and grow in that first year. And then even into the second year, I'm just like, I'm so fascinated by it because the neural connections are so quick.
Yeah, we're the beautiful thing about the brain is it is designed to adapt. Like it's
Hmm.
designed to adapt for survival. But what's neat is, I don't know if you remember all the hype around the Human Genome Project. Like,
Hmm.
or they were like, we're going to map the human genome. And then it was like over pretty quickly. And so
Hmm.
probably the most remarkable thing about it was like how fast it was over, that it wasn't actually that hard. And a tomato plant has more genetic variation than a human does. And the reason for that is because a tomato plant needs to be able to have the genetic sequencing to kind of survive in these different set of circumstances
Hmm.
without like, but it's limited to those. Whereas we are designed to adapt in any environment, so that we don't want that hard coded or kind of pre-coded. We want that open. And so that's kind of, anyway, the basis for it. We are designed to continually be influenced and learn and adapt based on the environments that we're in, which is why if you change your environment or you change your lifestyle, you can change your brain.
Oh, I love that. So let's talk about the lifestyle and then the habits that support brain health. So, what are the top habits that you recommend for maintaining or just improving brain health and just
Yeah.
cognitive function?
So, disclaimer, none of these are like super exciting. And
Well,
I
and
say
that's the thing. I think I tell people all the time, I'm like, it's not like it's meant to be boring in a way. Like it's not supposed to be exciting. Like it's like you got it's still
yeah.
stuff you got to do.
But I think people are always like, oh, like what's what supplement do I need? That's
Right.
another big one. What, do I need? Should I do crossword puzzles? That's another one. It's
Hmm.
like, no. It's the first piece of it is back to the basics, which is,
Hmm.
sleep 7 to 9 hours a night. We could talk for hours on just
Oh.
sleep alone, and it's a
Hmm.
focus for your brain. It is not a luxury. It is absolutely a necessity.
Hmm.
Moving your body every day, we know the benefits of that for the physical aspects. People don't necessarily think about it in terms of brain function, but how it's going to affect your mood and your focus and regulate your circadian rhythm and also impact sleep. Of course, nutrition, the basics of just eating whole, real foods, eating seasonally, locally, having a colorful plate, all of that. And then managing stress, I feel like is another one. So those are kind of like your four that it's like, okay, yeah, yeah, we know that.
Totally.
But do you really know how it's impacting your brain? And we could dig into all of those. And then I want to share a few more that maybe people don't always wouldn't naturally think of in kind of the health realm, but are really important for the brain. And so one of those would be this appropriate level of challenge. So when we look at brain performance over the lifespan, we tend to see, you know, cognitive function really peaks around age 40. And if, like I mentioned, we're living to be age 80, 90, 100, peaking around age 40 means that you're peaking at just about half your life, right? And so then
Hmm.
over half of your life is without peak brain performance. I don't think anybody wants that. And so what can you do to maintain or even continue to improve brain health, because just because that's like the typical trajectory, like just because it's common doesn't mean it's normal, or doesn't mean that that's what
Mhm.
we should accept. We don't have to accept that trajectory. So, intervening and recognizing that I need to stay challenged. Same thing with like retirement. You see a steep drop off once you retire. And so this idea that the level of challenge that you need to be at is going to be different for different seasons and phases of your life. Like, when you're raising kids, it's a different season versus when you've just started a new job versus if you are, more established in your career or you're starting a new hobby. I mean, there's so many different things. So it's so individual. And I think that's one piece that's hard, is that there is no one size fits all. So when people are like, tell me what to do, I'm like, well, it's different for everyone, because the things that I'm passionate about and my purpose and responsibilities in life are so different from yours. The way I use my brain every day is different, but we can still engage in the appropriate level of challenge. And it's really finding that sweet spot of, it's not too so easy that I can coast. It's not so hard that I'm frustrated and burnt out and stressed and overwhelmed. It's right in between. And so it's this moving target that you continually have to assess for yourself.
That makes so much sense, because a lot of times clients come to me when they're either not being challenged and they're kind of just complacent in their life and they're feeling bored and just understimulated, or they come to me on the other side of the spectrum where they are just burnt out, they don't have any resources, they don't have capacity, their nervous system is completely shut down. So it's like there's like these extremes, and I think that's one of the challenging aspects of that, is finding that sweet spot. It's almost like the Goldilocks principle. It's like it has to be just right, but just the right type of challenge. So how do you like help someone with that? Like how do you help them find an appropriate challenge that is going to help with their cognition, brain function, and just, overall well-being?
So a lot of it doesn't have to be super drastic changes by any means. I think what we can find, if you're, depending on which end of the spectrum you're at, if you're on that more burnt out, stressed, overwhelmed aspect, then it's more, emotion regulation, stress management, things to help regulate the nervous system,
Mhm.
so that you can cope with the challenges that you're facing and feel like you have what it takes to meet those needs. On the opposite end, feeling understimulated or just kind of coasting, like I'm on autopilot and it's just like not very stimulating. Um, how to bring that up? There's a few different ways. So, and I'll touch on, these are some of the other components of brain health or just lifestyle strategies that are important. But bringing that up in terms of how you engage with information. And so, like a lot of us, because we live in an age of information overload and there's so much coming at us all the time, and there's just endless, the endless scroll or the infinite scroll. And there's just like never, like you don't have to ever be bored if you don't want to. And boredom is actually a really great thing for the brain, for
Mhm.
creativity. So taking breaks and scheduling time for mind wandering is another one that people don't necessarily realize is really important. And then novelty. So, trying new things would be one way to re-engage people of like, how can I do something differently? Like I'm just doing the same old routine. Where can I shake things up? But being intentional to do that, not just for the sake of it, but for things that matter. So it's like, okay, I have to write, thank you cards for this event that I had, or, something recent. And it's like, instead of just like, thank you for this, it's like, how can I write this note in a way that like, what are like, if I had to think of like 3 words to describe this person, or think of one word of how this person makes me feel, or how I value their friendship, or like really kind of doing this cognitive exercise of thinking more deeply. And this is a really beautiful one with the thank you note, because you're getting this mix of gratitude for your brain, you're bolstering social connections, which are vital for the brain to thrive. And then you're also engaging your brain, your frontal lobes, your frontal networks in a deeper level of thought. So there's a way you could do the exact same day, the same activities, and in one way do it like on autopilot surface level, and another way do it very intentionally and engage your brain kind of in key tasks and things that are going to help promote health long term. So I'll give a little bit more detail with that example of like how you're kind of like the aspects of the ways that you're thinking about things. That's a really simple example with the thank you note. But another example would be like, I don't know, like I have to plan an event, or I have to write a paper or give a presentation, or, and with all these things, it's like you can kind of just check the boxes and do it. Or you can think like, really like, what is my main message? What is the key key point that I want to communicate, and then how do I structure it all around that, and like what's a way to bring in elements of curiosity or fun or surprise, and like just infusing these things within some everyday things. And again, it's like you don't have to reinvent like how you cook breakfast every day, but maybe it's like it is adding a new ingredient, and that's like bringing in, this novelty or challenge, or it is, I'm going to try a new recipe for dinner on the weekend because, so it's this idea of not like, you don't need to overcomplicate things unnecessarily,
Mm-hmm.
but giving yourself this opportunity, because the brain really loves to be challenged. It loves to learn. It loves
Mm-hmm.
experiencing novelty. And specifically with novelty, it sparks the production of the neurotransmitter norepinephrine, which is actually very neuroprotective. It helps with the kind of clearing some toxins, but also the formation of new neurons and neural connections, strengthening those connections. So getting a boost of like, which is why when we get bored, we're like, give me something new, like give me that stimulation. And there can be an unhealthy, again, spectrum of that. But if you are just in the doldrums of just like day in and day out doing the same thing, it really does not only affect your mood, but truly your brain health in the long run.
Gosh, that is so fascinating. It's like it makes so much sense. And I love the reason behind it and the science behind it, especially with just like the human need for novelty and like how actually important that is for brain health. And like we live in a world that is just it's so different. And being bored is just something that people are just not these days. And I'd love if you could touch on like why having that white space on your calendar, having just like some openness is so important for your brain health.
Yes. So there's something in the brain called the default mode network. So it's just a network of different areas of the brain that become active when you are daydreaming or letting your mind wander, or sometimes it's called the imagination network. And when this network is running, it is putting together information in new ways. So often people get their best ideas, or that your aha moments are not when you're at your desk, like trying to solve problems. It's
Mhm. In the
when you
shower.
yeah, in the shower, taking the dog for a walk, when you're going on a
Hmm.
bike ride, when you're just, getting ready for bed, about to fall asleep, or in the middle of the night, maybe you wake up with it, or first thing in the morning. And that's because the default mode network is able to work, and it can't work when you are actively, trying to think and execute on something. So scheduling in that white space is really beautiful. And I think it's something that's has largely disappeared. Like it's like no longer can you just stand and wait in line for something. It's like you immediately pull out your phone. Like
Hmm.
any little space we want to fill it. And we are in an attention economy where it's to companies' benefits to have our attention at all times. So they're going to make it as enticing as possible. And so we really have to fight that urge. And so one of the recommendations that I give to people is to take 5-minute breaks, but intentionally schedule them into your day, or when you're driving, to have no radio, no music, no podcast, don't talk on the phone, like driving in silence, even just for a few minutes, allows your brain. So not only is that if you're not actively thinking about something, letting the default mode network at play, so you're going to increase things like creativity and so new ideas. But you're also going to reduce stress, because it's like the constant busyness of our brain is something that is not helpful and not good for health long term. So giving yourself that break. And then it also is going to boost memory as well, because you're allowing your brain to consolidate what just happened. And a lot of time people will complain like, I'm having trouble remembering things, or and it's like, well, are you booked back to back to back all day long with no breaks and never pausing? It's like, for neuroplasticity to occur, two things have to happen. You have to have a period of challenge followed by a period of rest. If you don't have the period of rest, then it can't really complete that process or strengthen that new connection that was made. So it's like if you just came from a meeting or a conversation or an event, giving yourself that little buffer of just a few minutes quiet in your car, or go to the bathroom, do something, walk off, be by yourself, in between jumping straight into the next thing, is going to allow those new connections to form a little bit more. And it's also why sleep is so important, because at the end of your day, that's when the majority of that memory consolidation and thoughts and emotion processing happens. So, looking at your calendar, and again, it has to be intentional. You're not just going to take breaks, but in those breaks, we can talk about what is a break and what isn't a break, or some other examples
Hmm.
of breaks, I think is important.
Hmm. Yeah, I definitely want to touch on that. And I want to talk about some strategies to incorporate brain health into your daily routine? Because there's this gap between like knowing, like, and because it's all simple, right? It's like sleeping,
Mhm.
movement, nourishing your body, right? It's like if you look at all of the different diets and health fads, whether it's keto or paleo or, but they're all saying the same thing. Like at the end of the day, it's like eat whole foods, avoid processed sugar, drink enough water. Like it's all kind of the same thing, right? And so it's like we know there's this, like we understand, but then there's this like gap and people are not doing it. So what are some strategies that you help people with to incorporate this into their daily routines?
Yeah. Behavior change is hard. Like we are creatures of habits. Like just because the
Mm.
brain can change doesn't mean like it will. And knowledge does not change behavior. So you have to put up some, you know, some, I guess, what are they, guideposts or guardrails for yourself to help yourself do that. And it's about reducing friction and also, creating kind of triggers or cues for yourself, and then also celebrating when you do accomplish those. So I'm
Mhm.
taking some cues from the book Tiny Habits, which is by BJ Fogg. There's so many great, I know there's Atomic Habits, there's all things about habits, but really like at the end of the day, it's like starting small and manageable. So it's like, I always recommend, it's like, what is 5 minutes that you could take today? And what do you want to do with that 5 minutes, and when are you going to do it? And for a lot of people, morning is the best time to protect that time because it's least likely to get interrupted. And so it's like, whether that's, I'm going to take 5 minutes to be outside in nature, get morning sun, drink a glass of water, do some breath work, practice gratitude. Like you can do a lot in 5 minutes, right? Any one
Mhm.
of those things. And it's sort of like choose your own adventure, but choose it the night before and say, this is, I'm going to, set a timer, an alarm. And when this timer goes off, I'm going to sit here and do this. Um, it could be 5 minutes of a cold shower. It could be, like what, or, that's, well, maybe kind of a long time, maybe 2 minutes at the end, a minute cold shower at the end of your shower. But yeah, so I think that's kind of where I start, is just like, what is something, like what sounds exciting to you? Because also you don't want it to be a chore. You don't want to feel like, oh, I have to do this thing. It's like, I want you to think like, when I do this, then like, what is the immediate value or benefit that I feel? And so for me, with like my morning, say, breath work practice or meditation or prayer or journaling, whatever it is, it's like I don't get to, if I had my ideal morning routine, it would take the entire day basically.
Totally. Before I had Ellie, I was like, I had like 2 hours. It was lovely. Now, like, I'm like lucky if I can get like 10 minutes in. Sometimes it's 30, but like, it's true. It's like you just have to pick something that's small.
Yeah, you have to start small. And I think so, start small and then also know that like you can mix it up. So it's like maybe this week I just want to focus every day of 5 minutes on, sitting and just like breathing some slow breaths, right? Or
Mhm.
I want to take 5 minutes and I want to get outside and like just get fresh air and not be on my phone first thing in the morning. I think that doing, and then in doing that, you're immediately going to feel better, and that's going to wire things in with the reward system that's going to make your brain want to do it again. So I think it's just important to recognize that this isn't a have to, it's a get to,
Mhm.
and really reframing that in your mind, and then understanding, because of course, like we can sit here all day long and share all the facts and statistics and research around why this is great long term for your brain. But truly, we are creatures of immediate gratification, and we do what feels good, and our brain operates off of, emotional, like our emotions and what makes us happy. And so the more that you can really connect that behavior with those happy, good feelings, the easier it's going to be to continue to integrate that into your life.
And so then, like, through the repetition, that's where the new neural connections are made.
Exactly.
And so, I think when I talk about this with clients and just repetition in general, the question always comes up, well, it's like, how long do I have to do it? Like there's all these different things in books that's like 21 days or, 63 days or whatever, which all just kind of seem like arbitrary numbers to me. What would you say when someone's like, well, how long until the new connection is made? Because obviously, I understand that up into a certain point, like that's, our mid 20s is kind of like where our neuroplasticity is like firing the most. And then after that, it kind of slows down and it requires more effort and intentionality. So if someone's in their 30s and they're listening to this, they're like, well, how long do I have to do it until it changes my brain?
Yeah. So there is kind of the myth of 21. There's some truth to it. I think it's a nice goal or like a marker for
Mm-hmm.
people.
It's like attainable. It's not
Yeah,
like too out there.
yeah, it's attainable, but also it depends on the person and it depends
Mhm.
on the habit that you're trying to form. So like there was one
Mm.
study that looked at people trying to form the habit of taking a walk after dinner each night. Okay, so it's not a very complex habit, just like but requiring some change and to the routine. And it was like it took people, the range was between 18 days and like 264 days. So like there's so much individual variability. And I know that's
Mhm.
probably discouraging because people are like, just tell me how long I have to do it. So I think, for something like that, there's such a wide range. And then for something else, like maybe like a thought pattern or, something that you want to change, it's like could be longer. Or if it's if you have trauma in your past or you're having to like rewire that, those are going to take longer.
Mhm.
Not to be discouraging, but just to know you have to push through. And some interesting research from Dr. Caroline Leaf, just was chatting with her and like so she says 21 or she says to do 3 cycles of 21,
Okay.
so really like 63 days for a lot of that kind of more behavior thought work.
Thought work. Yeah.
And she said also what's really interesting is once you hit 21 days people are starting to see the benefits and they're feeling good and then they sort of pull back and then they
Hmm.
actually experience a dip. And so what I want to remind people of is that the healing process, the healing journey, or just even the self-improvement journey is not linear. And so if you experience that dip, don't let that alarm you, keep going. And if you can push through to around day 42, then you start to lock in those gains like longer term
Hmm.
and you'll see it come back up. So if you
Mm.
kind of are doing something for a couple weeks and then you start to feel like, oh gosh, I'm going down. A lot of that, I think part of it is just like you're having more insight and awareness of yourself, right? And then, but to not give up at that point. So I think, yeah, I like this idea of kind of 3 cycles of 21.
I like that too. I haven't heard that before like that. And it makes total sense because I see it all the time, especially like clients. Like if I work with them for, 3 months, they're like, I feel great. And then it's like, I always tell them, I'm like, that is exactly where you're supposed to be. And like, because we feel great, we end up stopping doing the things that work. And so now is the time to actually double down on the stuff that works. Cause the reason why you're feeling XYZ is because of the stuff that you're doing. There's a direct correlation. And sometimes we forget that. So that dip is so like, I love that you mentioned that because it's so relatable. And I think so many people that are working on themselves and like trying to be healthier and, become more resilient, like they can relate to that because I think every single person that has done the work on themselves has experienced that dip. But I love the idea of 3 cycles of 21 to me because I love to gamify things and I'm sure there's some neuroscience to gamifying. But I love 3 cycles of 21 versus like going into like, okay, we're going to do this for 63 days. Like there's just something to that that's like feels so much more attainable. And I think it's just like the simplicity. Something that came up for me as you were talking is, this idea that like we love challenge, we love novelty, right? But then we also hate change. Like the human brain resists change. We want things to be easy. We want things to be pleasurable. So how does that work? Like I feel like that's just so opposite and it's like so uncomfortable because it's like I want this change but also like I want it to be easy and it just feels awful. Like it feel like we call it the river of misery of like when you're in between these like cognitive dissonance of like two different sides of the bank and it feels just so bad in the body. So how do you approach that?
Yeah. So the brain's number one job is to keep you alive. So anything related to uncertainty or potential danger is like stay away from that. And change represents so much uncertainty or unknown, and there can be a lot of fear. And so it really kind of gets us to that more primal brain systems of just like, survival. I want to protect you. So it's going to try to avoid that change, even though it's so funny that it's like, yeah, we love novelty, we love something exciting and new, but then also like don't ask me to to do something different
It's
because it's so hard.
the
Um,
conundrum of being a human being. It's so confusing.
yes. So I think, that's kind of where we talked about like finding the right places in life. Like you need to have enough, I think to have productive change, you have to have a base of stability and safety so that like, okay, I'm grounded here, so that I can venture out here, right? And I have like a foundation to do that from. Um,
Mhm.
And yeah, so I think like it's not like the worst is when it's like everything at once, right? It's like I moved to a new city and got a new job and have any that like it's like then it's like you have no bearings. But I think
Mhm.
really assessing like, okay, what are being strategic about the changes and what you're asking yourself to do and ways that you're going to push yourself from your status quo and kind of like having just a thoughtful approach to doing that and not just, and I agree. I think so there's someone that I collaborate with who his name's Bruce Mao, and he founded the Massive Change Network. And he's all about like everything from carpets to city design to like just like designing everything and just how the world like needs massive change. And he's like, people hear me speak and they're like, yes, we need massive change, like all these things need to change. He's like, but then when you ask people to actually do something different, they're like, we want massive stay the same, like we don't want to change.
It's like, yes, all for it. And it's so true. Oh my gosh. Yeah. So that, what you said makes sense of just like kind of making sure you feel grounded and safe and like connected in that way. So then you can kind of go explore these like different changes in a way that feels good. And I think everybody's so different.
Yeah.
So it's not a one size fits all at all. Oh, that's so interesting. Oh my gosh. Okay. I have so many other things I want to talk to you about. There's two really big things. I want to talk about sleep because, again, it's like people, like, they're like, yeah, no, I know sleep's important. And then what they're doing before bed impacts, how they sleep and they're not making those changes. And, just different lifestyle habits that impact sleep and just kind of chalk it up as like, well, that's just how it is.
Mhm.
So I do want to touch about sleep, and then I want to get into like the kindness and connection because I feel like that really ties into mental health as well. So let's talk about how sleep affects brain health and cognitive function.
Yeah. In every single aspect. Like there's not a single bit of our body systems, our cognitive functions, just every single process resets, recalibrates, repairs overnight or while you are asleep. There is something, I feel like the lymphatic system is very popular in the wellness community, lymphatic drainage. Your brain has a glymphatic system that takes out the trash or clears the toxins at night while you sleep. That system only operates when you're asleep. So if you miss out on sleep, you miss out on clearing out the toxins that build up during the day. And there is something called sleep debt. So it's like if you, pulled an all-nighter, stayed out really late, were up all night studying and sacrificing that sleep, and you're like, oh, I'll just sleep in more on the weekend or I'll sleep later the next day, it doesn't clear. Like you didn't get to clear out the ones from that day. So there is an element of sleep debt that they're able to show on brain imaging. Don't, panic if you're like, oh my gosh, I just had, a poor night's sleep or
Mhm,
that happened.
mhm,
It's, don't worry, it's going to be okay. But know that the more consistent you can be, the better that is going to be to just help your brain function and regulate. And we also know that there is a relationship between sleep disorder um, and cognitive decline or things like dementia, and that dementia does also show a lot of disruptions and disorders with sleep. So there is a strong relationship there to keeping your brain healthy and kind of supporting it just at the very basic level of what it needs, and that it is everyone needs 7 to 9 hours of sleep. And this kind of cultural notion that we can pride ourselves on getting by on less sleep is actually like the data is clear that from everything from attention, reaction time, decision making, judgment, creativity, empathy, all of these skills are worse when you are sleep deprived, memory formation, all of that. So, you know, um, people that think that they can get by on it, it's like you might be able to get by, but you certainly are not performing at the same capacity as you could if you were getting a full night's sleep.
mm. So what are the lifestyle habits that negatively impact sleep and brain function?
So everything you do during the day affects your ability to sleep well at night. So it starts from the second you wake up and, getting morning sun is really important, setting your circadian rhythm, being in tune with the season that you're in is really helpful. The timing of caffeine, alcohol, meals, exercise, naps, all of those things will affect it. So you want to, try to avoid caffeine past noon. You don't want to take naps within 6 hours of bedtime and try to keep them to about 20 minutes. You want to avoid big, heavy meals really late in the evening. You want to have a couple hours between your meal and your bedtime. And then avoiding like the evening routine stuff's really important. So avoiding technology if you can, having a really good wind down routine that you look forward to that is, not thinking about work, not hopefully not involving screens, something like reading or taking a bath or journaling or sipping a cup of herbal tea and chatting with a friend or partner. Having that period so that you can calm your nervous system and really prepare it for sleep. And then your sleep environment itself is really important. So how your room is set up, getting rid of glowing electronics, preferably no screens in there either, charging your phone in a different room, getting blackout shades, managing the temperature, making sure that that's cool. And if it's noisy, getting like a white noise machine or earplugs. So there's like so many things you could start with. I would say if you had to start one place, it would be optimizing, like invest in a comfortable pillow and mattress, like the
Mhm.
and kind of the blackout shades and like getting the technology out of your room. I feel like setting that up can just make a huge difference.
Mhm.
And
I
glowing clocks.
Yeah,
Like get the one that
get a real
turn
alarm clock.
yeah, or like turn it face down or like just no glowing lights.
No glowing lights. Oh my gosh, I've loved that all of this is so good for your brain health and your sleep because I'm like been such a nut about this for like forever. As like I feel like the past like 8 years, and it's like a joke in our household, but it's just funny to think about how there used to be TV and how I used to watch TV and I used to playlist when I would make my spin playlist in bed. And I can't even believe that's how I used to be, but that just shows like you can change these habits, and they do, like it 100% impacts how we feel in our day to day, and there's no denying it. Like no one can deny that. And I think that, to what you're saying, it's like this is all really simple things that have a huge impact on our brain health, which like is the most important type of health that we have, because without our brain nothing else is going to work.
That's right.
And I love how like it really is like these are simple things. You're not saying things that are like totally crazy or out there. So I think what you've said about intentionality really hits home, because it is tied to that intention. It's amazing when I'm working with clients and I ask their bedtime routine, how many people are on their phones right before bed. And the idea of getting an alarm clock and not using their phone as alarm clock is like so mind blowing. It's
Right.
like there's an option. I'm like, there were people before like people did have to wake up at certain times before cell phones. Um, and yeah, it's like these little things, but then it's like not wanting to let go of what they're doing, because there's some sort of benefit that comes from it.
Yeah.
Um, oh gosh, I feel like we could do a whole thing on sleep.
Mhm.
Um, so those simple, like you said, really easy places to start, like just getting electronics out of your room, being really intentional about like what you're doing before bed. Because the thing that stands out the most is just like the detoxification that happens during sleep.
Mhm.
And so I'm curious because people, this we live in a catch up culture too, right? I need to catch up. Like I'm always behind. Can you catch up on
When it
sleep?
comes to sleep, there is this thing, like I mentioned, called sleep debt. And so it doesn't work like, oh, if I missed out now, I can make up for it later. It's just not that way. So don't panic if that's happened, but just know that like it really is important to maintain consistent.
Hmm. Yeah, it really is. Like it's like even the older I get, and then also with just having a toddler, and when she was a baby, it's like that's what we prioritize. Like that was one of our biggest investments, was to hire help at night in the beginning, so we could make sure that we're getting sleep, because we knew how important it is for our overall cognitive function. And like that was a huge priority for us. Some people are like, oh, that must be nice. I'm like, yes, it's definitely like a privilege, and a luxury to have help at night, but also like we prioritize that over anything else. Like we were like, this is where we're investing our time, and our resources, because of this very reason. This is like, it's like we understand, we hear about the habits, we hear about all the wellness gurus talking about the things to do, but to understand the impact of the brain is really important. So, you touched on kindness, social connection, and brain health. So, what is the benefits of compassion, social connection, kindness for our overall brain health?
Yes, we are designed for connection. So the brain is really wired for that. And that is why things like rejection hurt so deeply because it's signaling to the brain like you're not safe or you're not going to be, you're not going to survive basically. Like in the way that we evolved, if you think of caveman times, it was like you needed your tribe to survive. If you were on your own, you were going to be dinner for, some
Mm-hmm.
wild animals. So you weren't going to make it. So our desire to belong and feel connected and loved and cared for is just fundamental to how we are wired. Um, and so we can see the benefits of this, the experience of strong social support give it increases your immune system, it decreases depression and anxiety, it improves sleep, it improves longevity, you live longer. It improves cardiovascular functioning. I mean, it's just like your body thrives off of that. And so it is just, again, not a nice to have. It really is a have to have. And it doesn't mean that you have to be a like very lovey touchy feely person necessarily if you don't, that's not kind of your natural state, but it does mean you need to have a few close quality relationships of people that you love and trust in your life that you can go to for help, that are there to help you, solve like life's problems. There's a cool study that showed that if you are judging the steepness of a hill to climb, you actually judge it as less steep if you have people with you versus if you're
Mm.
alone, which I think is really neat. So having people in your corner is both psychologically and just from a physical brain health standpoint, very important.
So, can practicing kindness and fostering connections, can it actually change the brain like structure? Can it like it alter what's happening inside of your brain?
Yeah, I think it definitely has. There are different networks that are involved in something like empathy versus something like compassion. But I'm pretty sure that for areas where I think it's the medial prefrontal cortex, where it's like these are kind of your pro-social behaviors. So things like gratitude and kindness, compassion, or like the ability to see others' perspectives, that area of the brain, I believe, I'm trying to remember if I'm remembering the study right, but I think there you can actually have thicker volumes of the cortex in that area for people that have, practiced that more or experienced more of that.
Mm. It's so interesting because like I feel it, after I have a really deep connection, I can feel it in my body. I like sometimes even when I go to bed or like my husband and I have a great conversation before bed, like I can feel that difference. And it's interesting. Like I want to pay attention. Like I wonder if I sleep better those nights where like I feel
Oh,
deeply
yeah.
connected to whether it's him or what I was ever doing before. Cause you can definitely when you have more awareness, you start paying attention to it, and it's hard to deny that it's there, that it's not there when you have those moments.
Yeah, it's great. It's just people can't measure that the same way that you can, stand on a scale or take a blood pressure kind of thing. But it's like,
Right.
but it's just as effective and you're changing your brain chemistry. You're getting flooded with whether it's dopamine or serotonin or oxytocin, you're getting those good feelings. There's another study that was with people who had just like a common cold. And if they had a doctor that displayed more empathy, they actually healed from that
Mm.
cold faster than a doctor, those who saw a doctor who didn't give empathy. So it's just like truly at this physiological level, our immune killer cells, our T cells, all these things, like your body responds. And it's in ways that we, like you said, don't necessarily notice or maybe aren't able to quantify, but we can absolutely feel it.
Yeah. Oh, it's so good. So I want to talk about the connection then with brain health and mental health, mental wellness, because they're definitely interconnected. How would you explain brain health and mental wellness being interconnected?
Yeah, I feel like they support each other. So if you are taking care of your physical brain, like you are feeding it whole real foods, you are hydrating, you are, managing your stress and then getting adequate sleep and moving your body and doing all of those things, you're setting up your brain chemistry, your neurotransmitters, your outlook, your mindset. Like it's kind of like you're supporting all those things, or even like now we know so much about gut health and how that really influences mental health. So it's like kind of like it's sort of a chicken and the egg thing, but I really do feel like you can intercept it on either end. Like you can start with more of the mindset or mental health or like therapy work, and then those things can change brain chemistry, or you can start on this side with brain and intercept habits on that end and then improve mental health. So in some ways, I think that a lot of the habits and strategies around more towards brain are, I guess in my personal experience, easier to influence mood because it's really hard to change your thinking with your thinking. So if it's something like depression and anxiety, it's like the thoughts are there and you can't just like be like, I'm going to think different thoughts. It's like you have to go on a run, do an exit, like do something that's going to like give you a boost of a different feeling, right? So that you can then kind of kickstart into being more motivated or able to make some changes. So I think that that's kind of the relationship that I see, is that like all these things, like we know even the research around sleep and how that supports, like there is, I think it was something like 75% or a pretty high percentage of people that have a mental health illness or identify with that or reported that they have comorbid like insomnia or some type of sleep disorder. So it's like, can you target the sleep and improve that and get that foundation to support you, and then see how that then boosts your ability to handle some of those other things.
That was kind of my next question too. It's like, can improving brain health help with the symptoms of like issues like depression and anxiety? So what you're saying is like, if you approach it from like the brain health like perspective first, then it's almost an easier access point into addressing the other parts.
I think so, because you're really getting right at like you are changing your brain chemistry, you are, increasing blood flow, you're getting like you're switching
Right.
up the systems that need to work for that and really helping. So that's
Yeah.
where I would start.
That's your start. Okay. So my last question then is like the role of mindfulness and meditation. What role does this play in enhancing brain function?
There are so many benefits, and the research on this has just absolutely exploded over the last decade. There are so many papers on this now, but truly, it all comes back to nervous system regulation and the ability to really calm, and kind of, we are chronically living in our sympathetic nervous system, our fight or flight. And so the ability to come down from that is so important. And so I think, there's also other benefits in terms of, your attention and memory and mood and empathy, excuse me, and compassion and things like that. But I think from a like more brain nervous system perspective, it's really important for that, because I think that's where you start to see a lot of illness, or whether it's mental health or actual physical illnesses, start to stem from, it's like low grade chronic stress, and then that creates inflammation in the body, and then you get a whole host of other things. So when it comes to having a regular practice of, whether it's breathing, whether it's mindfulness, whether there's so many different types of meditation, so many apps, so many resources out there that are fantastic and don't take long. Again, it doesn't have to be like I went on a week-long retreat and did this, even though that's amazing if you can do that. But like truly the better thing is to build it into your day, so that, like I said, you're taking that 5 minutes here and there and just resetting, and the brain can reset and recalibrate very quickly if you make the space.
And that's kind of what I'm starting to understand, is like how quickly, when you give yourself that space, how quickly it can recalibrate. Like it's
Mhm.
not, I think there's misconception of like, oh, I need, 20 minutes in the morning, 20 minutes. And that's lovely if you have it. But what you're saying is like, you really don't need that much time to reset. And so before we wrap up, I do want to talk about the different kinds of breaks, because I do think that that's really important, because a lot of times people are like, oh, I just scroll on Instagram because I just need a break. And I'm like, that's not a break. Or I had this one client who said that he likes to watch DIY videos on YouTube. And I'm like, well, that's actually like you're learning something, but also after you've worked a full day might not be the most relaxing thing for your brain. It's still very stimulating. So can you speak to that before we wrap up? Because I think that's really important.
Absolutely. And just to reiterate your point about the breaks, it doesn't even have to be a full 5 minutes. Like if all you have is 1 minute, take 1 minute. If you have
Mm-hmm.
30 seconds, take the 30 seconds, like take
Yeah.
2 minutes, whatever it is. But yeah, so a true break for your brain is to disconnect from people and technology.
Mhm.
So that means, no podcasts, no, people are like, well, what about listening to music? Okay, if there's lyrics in the music, it's requiring effort from your brain to process that. So it's not a great idea, unless it's maybe more of like just an ambient or like a white noise kind of thing. If you're in a noisy environment and you want to be able to kind of like unplug. Um, and then, something like getting a glass of water, stand up and stretch, take a walk down the hall, turn away from your computer, lay on the floor, drive in silence. All of those are great examples. I would say, chatting with your coworker is not going to be a break. Scrolling on social media is not a break. Checking your email is not a break. Actively thinking through a problem, not a break. Maybe
Mhm.
sometimes people will say like, oh, like maybe like a more mindless task, like I'm just going to empty the dishwasher, or like I'm going to, fold laundry, like something that doesn't require a lot of mental effort that's kind of just a repetitive task that's maybe soothing is okay. But I would say the more you can just fully let yourself rest. Like I know for a lot of people, it's hard to maybe just sit still. So that's why, taking a walk around the building could be great, or just looking out the window is a good one too.
Mm. So what's your favorite way?
Oh, petting my dog.
Totally. I know.
Puppy cuddle.
There's twofold. It's very regulating. They're not
Yeah.
a person. They can't talk.
Yeah. Get a little bit of love.
You get a little bit of love, get that, that feel good chemicals released in your, yeah, petting your dog. I like to go outside, like when it's nice, not when it gets super hot, which we're teetering on that land right now in Phoenix. But sometimes I'll just go outside and just like lay in the grass for a minute if that's all that I have. And it is so simple and it's so effective. And I just love learning all of this of how it impacts the brain. Because for me, that already is so wrapped up in this world, it just almost makes it even more compelling to do. Like I feel so much more compelled to do the things that I'm already doing, knowing that how significant it is for my brain health. So this was amazing. Thank you so much. I feel like we could just talk about this for hours. And so you'll probably be back on the show again sometime soon. So we could talk even more. But I thank you for this very like high level understanding of the habits that support the brain and why they support the brain, because it is, I think, a lot of people want to understand the why. And I think for me, as specifically, it does make me feel more compelled. Is there anything else that you want to share before we wrap up? Where can people find you? What offerings do you have? If they have questions.
Yeah, I'm mostly active on Instagram. My handle is just at Dr. Julie Fratantoni. And I have a weekly newsletter on Substack called Better Brain. So yeah, happy to connect. Feel free to reach out to me on either of those places.
Okay, awesome. I'll make sure I put that in the show notes. My last question for you, it's not related to brain health, but it might be. If I were to ask friends, family, what your superpower is, what would they say?
Um, Probably the ability to I think my love for learning, like my love for learning and my love for sharing that learning and kind of
Mhm.
breaking it down in a way that is helpful for people.
Yeah. Well, even after this conversation, I would 10 out of 10 agree. This was so much fun chatting with you, learning from you. And I know that people can really take something very tangible from this episode. If you were to say just one area to start after like all the things that we talked about, what would it be?
Ooh. I always say sleep. If you start
Mhm.
with one thing for your brain, it's really optimizing sleep. And there's a million different habits and points that you can entry points for improving sleep. But outside of that whole sleep thing, I would just say the take 5 minutes. Like choose to take 5 minutes for yourself, for your brain tomorrow. Pick when you're going to do it and what you're going to do, and just take 5 minutes and just start there and see where you go.
I love that. You mentioned this before of like pick ahead of time. What's the benefit of that for your brain to like pick it ahead of time and know what you're going to do?
Yeah, I think you have to have a plan because like I said, otherwise your brain will just go on the same pattern that it always does. So you have
Yeah.
to disrupt it and make it really clear and reduce like the decision making of it, just like eliminate
Mm,
that for yourself. So it's just like, oh, like if your plan is to go on a walk in the morning, then like put your shoes right next to your bed. So like when you get up,
Mhm.
you just like do it, you know? So it's just about kind of eliminating that mental friction, even of, well, I've just to decide what I'm going to do. And there's, which one do I do? You know, it's just like, okay, just pick one for yourself and then it's just ready to go.
I love that because even for me today, I like didn't really have a plan for like my workout. I didn't want to do the workout that I usually do. And then I was like, okay, I'm gonna take my dog for a walk, but it was almost like it was too late, like to make the decision. I did it. I still got outside. It was only 10 minutes, but then I was able to come in and meditate for 3 before I got interrupted by my daughter going, Mama, done meditate? I go, I'm done. But like still everything you're saying, I'm like, oh, like it didn't need to be longer than that. I still got my body moving. It was 10 minutes. I still sat without interruptions for 3, and
Yeah,
that's good enough. And so I love that
celebrate that.
that's what you
Yeah.
said because it's like sometimes my brain's like, it need to be longer. Like I didn't have enough time, but I had I'm more than enough. I
Mhm.
moved, I meditated, and then I had connection and play with my daughter. So it's like I just checked off all that brain health habits.
Yes, girl.
Each day, we're good. Well, this was so wonderful. Thank you so much for your time and your wisdom. I'm looking forward to continuing to learn. And I'm so glad that we were able to reconnect. Like, seriously, just total blast from the past. And it just makes my heart so happy that we were able to have this conversation today.
Well, this was so wonderful. Thank you for having me.